All right, I'm live with Adees the Great. What can I say about Adees in introduction? First, let me just, for those of you who want to support, you could always subscribe to the newsletter at aksum.substack.com or go to patreon.com/tawahado. Adees the Great and I are true day ones. A lot of people say day one, but our moms was pregnant at the same time. So ain't no more day one than the womb.
That
And she is a very fascinating woman who is involved in many different ventures. But I think at least one big idea behind a lot of the ventures is the idea of black liberation and raising consciousness. What do you have to say about those two ideas for people who maybe have heard the words and the terms put together, and they might know what those words mean individually, but not necessarily together?
hmm. well, as it relates to Black liberation, obviously, if you are a person of color in America, or just really anyone in America who's just the slightest bit awake, or anywhere in the world, really, you know that in the words of Andre 3000, the darkest people suffer the most. And the idea of liberation is to be liberated, not only physically liberated in terms of like the systemic oppression that exists in this country and others, but also mentally, being free from the ideas that have been ingrained in us over time in so many different ways and so many different avenues. In my opinion, there's a role for everyone inside of this quote unquote liberation movement. Me personally, when I think about my talents or my natural ability, I feel as though I'm a builder. I'm a connector and I'm a builder. So I like to create spaces and platforms specifically for Black people, Indigenous people, and then also connect. So where I see value, or where I find value, giving people the opportunity to increase that value or gain something from that value. So being a connector is something that I feel is integral in my efforts to liberate Black people. As far as raising the consciousness, I think that's just a matter of one, being patient, and then two, um, making anything that I know or that I'm thinking about accessible, and easily available, readily available for the people. I think that has a lot to do with raising the consciousness, and more than just that, also showing by action. So as I am, and I live, and I continue to be, allowing that, not in like a weird role model kind of way. I'm not trying to be anybody's like leader or anything like that, but just moving in a certain kind of way and showing people that it's possible to move in this way and still be and get and do and whatever it is that you're trying to achieve. So that's my version of raising the consciousness.
I love it. It's beautiful. I have always been interested in political movements, and I've seen people in dissident movements on the left and on the right use similar phrases, this phraseology of like, it's easy to critique something that is a system or a construct, but what's harder to do, or at least if not harder, people don't seem to act on it, or people don't seem to be doing it as much, is
Mhm.
to build, like you're saying, to
Mhm.
build the new world within the shell of the old, is the way
Mhm.
some people phrase it.
Yep.
So I'm right there with you in the building, and I'm trying to build like a video, audio, and textual empire, and try to survive on it. So I love that we're on the same page. But I also saw there's something funny, and you and I grew up in, I want to say, pretty close to the same exact environment. I know, you spent some time on the East Coast too, but growing up in LA originally, and our parents being of very similar background, uh, as close as two people could be, right? Every two people are going to be different, but I think
Mhm.
we grew up in two similar cultural environments, and I could already see you have kind of an aversion that I think I'm familiar with to words like movement and leadership or role model, which traditionally are seen as kind of positive words, but maybe it's for staying away from a cult of personality. But why wouldn't you want to refer to, or what aversion do you have to the word movement? Is it just too constraining of a word? And same thing with like a word like leader or role model. Like, you still feel like you're too young to be a role model? Because Freddie Hampton was like 20 years old when
I know, like I'm like 30 now. I'm not too young for anything anymore. But I'm not I don't have any aversion to that word movement. I actually believe that the work that I'm doing is in fact a movement. This idea, this building a new world, is a movement. It's a way of thinking. It's something new and different. So I'm comfortable with movement. I'm not comfortable with role model and leader. One, because I'm constantly evolving and constantly learning and constantly growing. Some of the ideas that I had as early as a year ago have radically changed, or just have really changed so much that I can't sit here and say that I'm the same person that I was back then in terms of how I feel and how I interact in the world. So if someone were to judge me on the contents of my conversation 3 years ago and now, I feel as though that's like, it's too harsh of a rubric. I don't want the constraints of what it means to be a leader in that way, to be the forward front facing thing of the movement. Now, I do understand that in order to do the work, you have to get it done. So somebody has to be there physically, their face or whatever. And I've been called the face of whatever before, but I don't actively accept it because it's not about me. Actually, I want it to exist whether I'm there or not. I want the feeling and the intention to surpass me. You know what I'm saying? So, and I want it to be more about the platform. And through that, I find that I work better that way, where it's kind of like, I don't know if you ever do this, but like when you're referring to something that you're doing, you say we. So yeah, we are coming out with a new this, or we, whatever. And intuitively, I do that for all things. Just, and I think it's because there's something kind of, almost scary about like I'm doing this, and not even just scary, but just like self-centered about I. But when it's we, it already comes from this idea and this platform that there's this thing that's happening, that's moving forward and that's growing, that you can come and be a part of, where it's it's more like a partnership. And I don't want people to feel like they're partnering with me. I want them to get into the ideas, you know what I mean? And that's really what's more important, is the ideas. And I am not the source of the ideas. I'm just either downloading it or just learning about it as I go and as I grow, and based off what I see. So yeah, like I'm a student. I learn from my 11-year-old cousin. She right now is investing her money in silver, and she was teaching me about
Hey, my guy Ron Paul's been repping that for a long time.
Huh?
I said my guy Ron Paul's been repping that for a long time.
I guess, like, I don't know. She was teaching me. She's like, yeah, I have this much money in my bank account, and and I was like, all right, girl. Well, good to know that you're going to be the financial one in the family. So I guess my point is to say is that I have no shame in it not knowing, and I have no shame in the fact that I'm constantly growing and evolving my ideas on almost a daily basis. So
it's so funny to hear you say this. So there's this funny thing about, whatever, church people or people who don't identify with church, because there are a lot of people who identify with the church who, if they're just going through the motions, they don't grasp some of the fundamental ideas. And yet there are some people who may not identify as much with the church, and yet they grasp some of the big ideas. And one of the big ideas of the church that people don't understand is everyone wants to see themselves as me, I've done this, that, and the third. But the way you described yourself as a conduit of something greater than you, the way you described yourself as an instrument or a tool to be used by an idea that's greater, people could have different conversations and discussions about what it is. Is it God? Is it universe? Is it, whatever it is? But just that basic framework that you laid down is a huge biblical concept that a lot of people don't understand in their relationship with God. So I love hearing that from you, who wouldn't, you're not necessarily a preacher out here. So the fact that you get that concept, and I'm telling you, many people who say they're churched do not. It reminds me of, I used to work in AmeriCorps back from 2012 to 2013. And they had these little standards for what they represent, and one of the standards they would say for those people who are social justice minded and wanted to serve people in the education sector, for me it was Watts in what they call South Los Angeles nowadays, euphemistically trying to abolish the South Central title. They would say, willing to serve a cause greater than self. And it stuck out to me, and it was funny to me because a lot of those cats didn't identify with organized religion, but actually, interestingly enough, a bunch of them used to be like Jesuits or grew up in Catholic school or something. A lot of them were tied to LMU out here in LA as well, and yet there was something still spiritual moving them. I like that you identified in that way. Another thing that I've been reading a lot is people who critiqued the Enlightenment and the American and French revolutions. I've been reading more and more of their texts. I've been fascinating because I'm always trying to peel back my biases. And as someone born and raised in America, one of the things I take for granted is like how great was the Enlightenment, how great was the American Revolution and French Revolution and stuff like that. And we don't have to go back as far as the Enlightenment in Ethiopia. In Ethiopia, we just go back to 1973, where, or the 50s and 60s when our parents grew up there. You've had some time that you spent in Ethiopia and in America. America typically is more of the rugged individual, which is the focus, the I. But the we that you're talking about, there's a little bit of more collective decision making and like collectiveness in general in Ethiopia. Can you speak on maybe any funny things that you ran into? And then I want to jump back into what you were saying about changing your mind, because that's a very interesting thing that not a lot of people want to admit. But when you were in Ethiopia, did you run into anything that made you more of a we than an I, or more collective than individual? Anything you could recall in the workspace or personal space?
So my first real, epiphany or realization of when I was in Ethiopia was because I wasn't there just visiting. I started there visiting, but then I started working and living there, and which is a totally different vibe than visiting. And what I realized is, despite being very much tied to my Ethiopian identity in America, while in Ethiopia, I realized how American that I am. Like I'm very American. That means that I'm direct. I'm kind of like blunt. When people are looking at me too hard, I'm like, what are you looking at? Like, why are you staring at me? And I feel like a little disrespected, kind of. Just like this weird roundabout way of like getting to how people really feel. It's a very poetic dance to the social environment of Ethiopia, where it's kind of like you're saying something without saying it, and then you're insinuating, and then and there's so many things already in America, like that kind of stuff. I'm a little bit like, I don't pick up on all the cues, you know what I mean? So in Ethiopia, that's something I realized that was even more difficult. It's like all of these cues that I remember one time, one of the guards at the job that I was working, he's a driver too. He pulled me aside with one of the other guards and was telling me, because I guess they found out who my cousin was or where he lived. And he was telling me that this person is also from that neighborhood where my cousin lives and is like my relative. And I'm just looking at them like, okay, great. Like, later on, I found out that I was supposed to somehow take care of him, like, financially or whatever. But I didn't know. I was just like, all right, my cousin, great, like whatever. So anyway, so that is something that I realized as far as. So I had a lot of criticisms actually about Ethiopia. I was kind of taken aback. I had a very romantic idea of what Ethiopia was growing up. I grew up in Florida for a majority of my formative years, and like I told you earlier, is that the Ethiopian church that I grew up in, Orthodox church that I grew up in, for me was just like what Ethiopia was, and then the community and knowing each other, and everybody's like TA, Gashe, like, you know what I'm saying? And that's how I thought. And so when I got there, and not everybody's a TA, not everybody's Gashe. I mean, there is a certain level of respect, but not everybody is your family, one. So there was that. And then I just sort of felt kind of like I didn't relate. for a lot of things. And that's something that I realized too, that I felt as though there wasn't a lot of individual like critical thinking. I felt there was a lot of kind of group think happening.
Yep.
And I would notice it almost every day for in different ways. And a lot of like weird power trips and things like that. So I don't mean to sit here and just like throw the country under the bus or whatever. I'm very proud and I still identify as Ethiopian, but I realized that it
I was
was,
like, "Law, you better."
yeah, it wasn't as glitter and gold as I thought it was going to be, living there and being there. So I think it didn't necessarily, but to speak to the we part, it was very refreshing every single day to wake up and being in a black place. I literally forgot that I was, not that I didn't forget that I was black because I appreciated it, but I forgot that it was a factor. Blackness, race, anything like that. I didn't feel it at all until maybe I saw a white person or a Chinese person or something. Then I remembered that, despite them just being the one person, they were very much a symbol of what I had left behind in America.
That's that black privilege that Charlemagne the God talk about.
The black privilege, and then also the diaspora privilege that I had, whatever. I mean, it got pretty rough.
On that. So for people who don't know, someone like you, born and raised in the U.S., who goes back to live in Ethiopia, the people there call you diaspora.
Diaspora, yeah. And man, adjusting was funny, especially getting paid there. Working there, getting paid like a local, getting paid every month. I had no concept of budgeting. Like I was young too. I just graduated college, so like I just wanted to party and hang out with my friends and stuff. But I don't think that's really where I got the we thing.
Okay. Yeah, it sounds different because it sounds like you don't like the we decision making. You just don't want someone to feel as if they're establishing a partnership with just you, but that they're connected to a larger movement. That doesn't mean you want to make group decisions. Like I want people to friends, they laugh all the time. Like if we're trying to go to a fast food restaurant, niggas is trying to have like philosophical treatises about what should we order. And there's nothing that frustrates me more than like 5-6 Ethiopians having a debate, and especially when you're at the cash register. Like that drive me crazy. Like I will look up the menu online and I will make my decision in advance by myself. Like I know what I want. But they're like, Henok, what do you think about this? And then here's where I come off as disrespectful. They say, Henok, what do you think about this? If I genuinely tell them what I think, then they want to have a debate. And I'm like, I'm not going back and forth with you. Like, this is what I think. You can you could reject what I think, or you could accept it. But I'm not finna have a debate about what food. I'm just trying to grab my food so we can talk about important things.
Yeah. You made that. I'm glad you made that, kind of comparison where, yes, I do appreciate the we in terms of like the attachment to an idea that supports all of us, but not a we when it comes to individual thoughts. Like I think that you have to come, and that's what we talk about. That's why I talk about raising the consciousness, because if you raise the consciousness of the people, then they choose and they decide and they realize that to alter their reality, that other realities are possible and able, and also they're able to contribute to the conversation, not just be receivers. I don't want that. I'm not producing anything to provide. The only thing that I'm creating is the platform. I'm creating the space. I'm curating the energy, if you will. Everything else is everybody else's contribution. So you have to be able to have something of your own in terms of ideas, in terms of whatever energy, in terms of, morals, whatever the case may be. You have to bring something to the table. That's a part of the group, the we too. And if it's groupthink, if it's like, oh, well, I'll only do that if I know that 10 of my family members have already done this successfully, then that's not it. For me, at least.
Yeah, from the Black American perspective, it's there's a party going on. Who all there? From the Ethiopian perspective, it's From the Ethiopian perspective, it's interesting you say that because that leans into a lot of the work that I was doing with Habasha LA back in the day with Ida, who's been on this program before. And there are good reasons why they do this, but the typical mentality is for the parents to come here to either consciously or unconsciously carrying the trauma of communism, the trauma of the past federal democracy that seems to be coming to a close in Ethiopia, and dealing with that, sometimes not seeing, their fathers or mothers again until they even pass away, only writing letters to them or calling them on the phone, hearing about the Red Terror, people turning each other in. And then all they want is like super practical way of life. So they say, doctor, and it's a typical typical immigrant story. They want you to be a medical doctor. They want you to be a lawyer. They want you to be an engineer or related to a doctor, a nurse. And they put you on this path.
County. Don't forget the county.
Yeah, county, LA County. You're good for life. You're good for life, LA County. I used to work at the Department of Consumer and Business Affairs. I did a 300-hour clinic of mediation there. So I was working, getting people outside of court and litigating. And I would always see random Ethiopians all up in the county building. And they're like, oh,
you landed a job at the county. Just call yourself settled and made in the Ethiopian parent.
I wish. That was just volunteer work. In fact, some of the litigants didn't believe me. They're like, you doing all this for free? I was like, I'm getting academic credit. But anyway, they try to pin you down there versus perhaps you have different interests. Perhaps that's not
so fulfilling, because we have such a rich history, cultural history of art, in the arts, music. Let an Ethiopian person tell it. We invented the musical note or whatever.
That's the shirt you got?
Oh yeah, shout out to the Saint Yared, who is an Ethiopian illustrator and just brand, I guess, lifestyle brand. Yeah, so we have such a rich history of that. But I mean, like you said, I think there's that history of trauma that is like, look, whatever happens, I don't want my kids to go through any lack. And we're coming to this country, we're supposed to get it. And this is the way that they said to get it. And then also our parents came in a time where Black people had limited opportunities too. Like I know my dad came when he was 16. So he went to high school in DC. At Duke Ellington. I think it's something else now, but so what was that? That was like the
early 70s.
Yeah, I think it was like the late 60s when he was
16. Oh yeah. Wow, your pops came early.
The 60s. So what was happening in the 60s? It was JFK was around, right? There was like a Korean War in the 60s, I believe. There's a lot of stuff. You know what I'm saying? So to come as Black people to immigrate to this country to see, all right, this is the way. First of all, education was the way that was taught to them to begin with. This is the way. This is how you do it. This is whatever. And then so it's natural to want to impart that to your kids. But I don't know if there's a culture that is like more open and more free about it. Like a foreign culture, I should say. Like I think every immigrant first generation kid has that same story. My parents,
that mentality.
They want you to do your education. Like my parents told me to go to college. That's the biggest thing, was go to college, which was like, damn, I went to college and I was like, all right, now what? Like, what am I supposed to do now? Like, all right, I guess
Did they push you down any particular career paths?
They didn't push me down. They just swatted away any ones that warrant something. Like
what got swatted away? We trying to be
marketing got swatted. Communication, something kind of communications major got swatted. I didn't let a lot of swatting happen before I just picked something and then I was like, forget, whatever, fuck it. Which was pre-law, and with the lie that I was going to go to law school, and I never went.
Hey, it's not too late. There's a school in LA. I'm forgetting it now, but it's something like the People's School of Law, and it's like a social justice minded law school. They churn out a lot of public defenders, which if I ever went back to law school to get a JD, that's probably what I would be, as a public defender. Mm-hmm. And I've looked at it before. It's like $3,000 a year for 4 years part time, and it's
not at all.
Yeah, so it's 12,000 in total, which is It's super affordable. It's meant for people. So that's just in the back burner. If you ever wanted to throw JD or Esquire at the end of Adees the Great.
Honestly, if I went back to school, and I have actually done like some community college schoolwork and stuff, it would be in the arts, I think, or like learning a skill, a specific trade.
Yeah. YouTube keeps showing me those masterclass ads, and there's so many. There's a chess one I've seen. There's a creative writing. There's a one on filmmaking. Like, I want to take all them joints. I haven't bought them yet, and they do not give money to this program, but they go hook me one of these days.
I don't know about chess, but your local community colleges have a lot of really good programs. Like, I'm in a film and TV production program at West LA actually right now, currently, and it's like, I didn't know school could be like this, where it's so hands-on and like you're doing the thing that you're learning in real time. The quiz or whatever is like literally just what you just did. So it's like, if you didn't do it, then you don't know the answer to the quiz. You know what I'm saying? So I like that. I think that it's if the school's gonna be like that, then I'm with it.
Yeah, there are a lot more of those getting done. I remember Killer Mike was one of my favorite artists since '04 when I heard him on Madden. It's such brilliant marketing that he put his song on Madden. People are knowing about him now because of his involvement with Bernie Sanders and getting the Democrats elected down in Georgia. Obviously, Stacey Abrams had a lot to do with that, but so did Killer Mike. And people cannot underrate his involvement. And one of the things he was big on, where he's controversial, is he learned from his grandfather. He's a part of this school that appreciates George Washington Carver and believes that the ills of Black people from the Civil War to now can mostly be talked about in terms of forced integration, as opposed to just giving equal funding in segregation and pushing people into everyone getting like a humanities degree instead of people earning like honorable trades, and like looking down on like plumbers, electricians, farmers, you know what I'm saying, in the South, especially like people who have plots of land. And everyone wants to push you into a position where you get a degree so that you can be certified through that signaling and become an employee. But the whole Killer Mike school and what he learned from his grandfather, relating it back to Black liberation, is that Black people were freest when they were self-employed, because nobody cares about you like you care about you and your own community. And so he promotes that a lot. I know he's working with some Black banks down, I think, in Atlanta as well.
Greenwood, I signed up. I'm on the waiting list. I'm like 400,000 something or whatever. But I definitely want to take my money and put it in to that venture. I think it's gonna be. I think it'd be a good. It's digital. It's a digital bank, so it's different than any other Black bank that I've heard about.
Digital meaning like there's no physical locations, or
no physical locations. It'll become.
That's interesting.
Digital, yeah.
Yeah, I have one like that. I have one of my bank accounts is like with a standard one that I'm trying to pull out as soon as I can. Another one is with a digital bank. So that's interesting. And I've seen a lot of the credit union movements as well that relate to that. I know you talk a lot about imagination, and I haven't gotten to them yet, but I know you've recommended Octavia Butler before. I'm a huge science fiction fan. Can you tell me what got you into either Octavia Butler or science fiction, and how, if at all, that's related to your ability to try to reimagine worlds and possibilities for our peoples?
Yeah, sure. So I really love fiction. I think the majority of my peers who like to read typically like to read nonfiction. I'm like usually the only person who likes fiction in my group, but I love fiction. I grew up reading avidly. I owe that a lot to my dad, who I also owe my Black identity to. He kind of from a very young age told me, he's like, hey, don't let anybody tell you that you're not Black. That was like a big thing that he imparted on me. And I don't know, naturally or otherwise, I just gravitated towards stories that had Black female protagonists, whether it's American Girl, or some story about some girl in Africa, or I also really like stories about India. I don't know, India reminds me a lot of Ethiopian culture, I guess.
Have you been called Indian before?
Yeah, well, yeah, I've been assumed to be Indian before.
Assumed Indian, yeah. Our food is similar because we're equatorial nations, and I think we were talking off camera earlier. at least one part of India, I'm forgetting the name, but there's a specific part of India that received hundreds, if not thousands, of Ethiopian slaves when Gurang Ahmed almost destroyed Ethiopia. And so that was sometime in the 1600s. So
Really?
for sure, there's a part of India that's ethnically close to us.
Oh, really? That makes
Yeah.
a lot of sense. And then, yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I could only
But
imagine.
India's vast. India's vast. So it's obviously not like,
It's not it, I'm sure,
yeah.
but like I could just only imagine how even within the transatlantic slave trade, how a lot of Indian people were indentured servants in the Caribbean and stuff like that. Not saying that they were all Ethiopians, but I mean, a lot of Guyanese people look just like us.
They do. It's so funny. I have one friend with some ancestry back there, and there's a guy that works with my pops who's from there. I've been to Honduras before on the border of Belize, Guatemala, and Honduras, and it's very interesting. Some of the people you meet, you're right, they're just like that, and some of the people, because I could speak a little Spanish, they thought. Like they wouldn't believe me. I could tell you, especially the little girls. I was like, I'm from Africa. And they're like, you're not from Africa? They're like, nah, you're not from
Yeah,
but
I haven't got a chance to do as much traveling as I'd like, but ideally, I would like to visit all of these places that you're mentioning: Brazil, Costa Rica, Honduras,
ooh,
Colombia. There's a lot of, and not to take it too far away from this, but
you
there's.
can take it anywhere.
I, okay.
I got notes, but we could go anywhere. This is sci-fi in real life.
Oh yeah, sci-fi. That's what we're supposed to talk about. My bad. So I'll first start there. So yeah, so I got into sci-fi, I think, just because sci-fi is like the ultimate fiction. You know, it's very escapist. It has every single thing about it is not of the world as we know it. You know what I'm saying? Not just taking you to a different place, location wise. It's taking you to different species and humanities, and there's also rules of sci-fi. Like for instance, if you're into vampire stuff and whatever, you have to. There's some type of scientific like fact basis that has to kind of like, you know, be there somewhere. You know what I'm saying? You can't just make crazy stuff up. But yeah, sci-fi is really great. So Octavia Butler, she's really dope. She's a Black, what they call Afrofuturist author, and that's because she told stories about the future and with I guess science fiction, but as it related to people of color, Black people, and the social and economic and gender and sexual um, situations, obstacles, whatever that people face, you know, within these science fiction contexts. So I thought it went deeper than any other apocalyptic stories, or it went deeper than any other scientific fiction stories because it dealt with real life things, but just in a different way, in a different format. One of my favorite books of hers is Parable of the Sower. I don't know if you've read that one, Parable of the Sower, but
No, but I know the biblical account. That
okay, well, yes, that's my entry for Octavia Butler. If you never read her, Parable of the Sower is the one.
that's one of my favorite parables. So now I feel like I have to read
Now
that.
you gotta read it.
I know what she's referencing.
I don't. By the way, you know, you see, I'm in my mom's house. I don't know if you can see white Jesus behind me.
Oh, I can't. I see the halo of him a little bit.
He's everywhere in this house.
Okay. You need to buy her some Black Jesus or some Afro-Asiatic Jesus. It's funny to say Afro-futurist. I'm more familiar with the movement in music and design, but I have heard of it in reading. It was based off that I started writing, and one of my guests that was most popular had mentioned this French guy named Guillaume Fay, who has this movement called archaeofuturism, where he wants to build futurism off of the institutions of the past. And I had an artist named Noh, who's in Ethiopia, on this program, who he does that. He has like Lalibela, but like with spaceships. He has like a monk on a cloud with a grass hut flying around, kind of like Dragon Ball Z. And so I called it Afro-Asiatic futurism in one of my blog posts. Afro-Asiatic because the vast majority of the languages in Ethiopia, they're called Afro-Asiatic. And then archaeofuturism to shout out to shout out Afrofuturism and to shout out archaeofuturism. I kind of combined it. And I was talking about the way, it's funny, longevity experts now are talking about things that are great according to their evidence. And those things have naturally been taking place in the Horn of Africa. Walking barefoot taking cold showers, and fasting are three of the recommendations that a lot of these like anti-aging experts talk about. Naturally, you walking around in Ethiopia, you're barefoot, you don't get to heat your water, so you cold water, and then you fast because the church tells you to fast, or because Islam tells you to fast. Like, it's so funny.
So I think you were in the Clubhouse group, but a friend of mine, actually the same year, was speaking about this curator who said the future hasn't happened in Africa yet, or something of that nature. And one of the pushbacks that I had to that was, I believe that the future has already happened in Africa. And we're just kind of like coming back to the future in a way. We hear accounts of like Wi-Fi and like these super lit building structures that they didn't have the technology for supposedly at the time, and these levels of like very sophisticated levels of being able to communicate and from long distances and things of that nature. So it's all very futuristic, but it's been told to us in a way of like, I think the larger white supremacist narrative is that they started from zero and then got here. But I think that there was something that happened before their zero, obviously, which was probably our 100. You know what I mean? So yeah, I think that. Yeah, I think that there is a lot of futurism currently in Africa as it stands, like you said. And if you think about it, even forget Africa, within Black people as a whole, like you think about group economics, right? So in the hood or whatever, in a poor area, 2, 3, 4 friends, they're like, hey, if everybody has 50 cents, we can put it together and we can buy a bag of chips and we can share it. Do you know what I'm saying? And that's something that would happen naturally, just out of the desire for everybody to have chips. You know what I'm saying? It's not like, hey, I'm going to do this thing for you so I can get all of your guys' 50 cents and I'm going to buy my chips on my own, or I'm going to wait or whatever. It's very much like, if I have a little bit, you have a little bit, let's put it together to get something for all of us. And I think that's a natural tendency of Black people. That's our natural way of doing things. I don't believe that we are naturally capitalists. I think that we are a type of people who want everybody to have something because that's how it's always been. We were only introduced to this idea of lack after, certain people came into the picture. So I think this idea, this future that we're all sort of trying to build for, the world, when we think of all these socialist movements and things like that, has already existed and has been existing in the hearts and minds of Black people for centuries. So we've been the future, if you will. And I forgot who said it, but there's this quote that's like, there are Black people in the future. I can't remember what the author was who said it, but it's true. And I think it's good to remember that.
Yeah, it's very interesting when you give the example of the hood and the chips, because I think one of the things I picked up from the probabilist Nassim Taleb is this idea of scale and scaling, and sometimes trying to scale too fast or too slow. Like, I give shout outs to the Emperor Haile Selassie. At the same time, I'm critiquing him. I'm there to critique too. And one of my critiques of him is maybe he was trying to do what he was trying to do too quickly, and maybe he should have done it slowly and maybe give up power to the next person. But the scale idea is like state socialism or communism in Ethiopia.
Mm-hmm.
I think there are very few people who would still say that worked. I think most people say there's issues there. But like you're talking about at the small scale level, and you're talking about children getting chips, but beyond that, we have these indigenous institutions like the hither, which is basically a healthcare plan. People pay in every month, and if you get sick or if you die, the community's monthly payments go towards that. But if everybody's healthy, then they're good. It's like a decentralized healthcare plan, the hither, the ukub, where people throw in their money every month. And 1 month out of the year, or however many times, you get all that money at once. So it's a way of getting interest-free loans, which is
Mm-hmm.
incredible because all the major
Mm-hmm.
Abrahamic faiths are
Mm-hmm.
against interest. And yet one of the things in a modern society that all of us participate in all the time, we talked about bank accounts earlier, is interest. But the ukub is an interest-free loan that the community is doing. So we have the ukub, we have the idir, we have the chips. We have it at this small scale. And the question is how do you scale that up and build that up? And I know that we're not necessarily going to solve it right now, and you're involved with many different projects. One of the ones that kind of has the aesthetics of what we're saying, and I've seen it in you guys have really cool designs. I appreciate that you and your girls are working on New Africa and 1-800 Pull-Up Gang. Let's plug it in and talk to me about it. And before the Rona and after the Rona, or during the Rona, like what's good? Because I've seen you do stuff on IG, but I've seen you and I've been to in-person events as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, 1-800 Pull-Up Gang is an events platform, and also a event production company that produces different community events, such as New Africa. New Africa is probably our most notorious, if you will, party. We did it every Friday at this hookah lounge called Ethiopics in Little Ethiopia on Fairfax. And the party essentially was created, one, because we were tired of the smoke and mirrors of the Los Angeles Hollywood nightlife scene. There's a lot of exclusion, a lot of fake exclusivity, a lot of clout, a lot of surface level BS, essentially, where you see people, empty clubs and people in lines for hours. Just didn't make none of it made sense.
Scam.
Yeah, all these people in line, they're willing to buy drinks and whatever else, but they just won't let them in, right? So I feel like you miss out on a lot of people and things like that. So I wanted to create a place, and I did this alongside my two partners, Lozi and Betsy Eob. And we wanted to create a place where it was somewhere safe for Black people to come, be free, tap into a certain energetic frequency, and kind of be amongst each other without any kind of feeling of needing to be anybody else but yourself. So that's kind of how it started. And then it really became what we call a movement to unify people via sound and movement specifically. We very much put a lot of effort into curating the DJs every Friday. So all of the DJs were what I consider to be the up and coming talent of the area. And then we had people coming from other places as well. And they all spun what I like to call within the boundaries of Black sound. I mean, you could say the entire history of music is Black sound, but specifically we created boundaries around Afro beats, and then there was dembo, reggaeton, and then there would be baile funk, and then trap, whatever, Nola bounce, go-go, all of these different Afro house, all these different Black genres. And what our DJs would do is obviously they would play the songs, but they would create these mixes that were cross genre. So you'd have an a Afro house Nipsey Hussle edit, you know what I'm saying, or whatever. And they really were on the what I feel is the precipice of a brand new sound. You know what I'm saying? And the idea of that is that when people come to this party, whether you're a native of Los Angeles or you're from Accra, Ghana, or whatever, both of you guys are dancing to the same rhythm, even if you never heard the song played the way it's been played, or maybe it's a song that I recognize and you don't, and vice versa. But the drum pattern, the rhythm, the snares, the whatever, it activates something inside of you that's ancestral, that it doesn't matter where you're from and what you've ever known before, you can still move to this. And I think that was the kind of a common thing that maybe you might find that also with food. You know what I'm saying? Certain foods can connect people and whatever. You eat rice in your culture, I eat rice in my culture, but we eat it different, but it's both rice, so I'm fucking with it. You know what I'm saying? But I felt as though this was beyond food because it was more than you could be vegan. You might not even want that food. But with this, it's you can't help but tap your foot because it's inside of you. You know what I mean? So that's something that that we did with New Africa. And then 1-800 has other events. We did Emoji Fest. I think you came to that in Lamar Park.
Yeah,
which
talk about Lamert a little, because Lamert is a little institution in LA, popularized probably mostly by Dom Kennedy, but it's bigger than Dom Kennedy.
yeah. So me, I spend a lot of my time in what is in Los Angeles District 10. So that goes from where Little Ethiopia is to K Town through Mid City and down Crenshaw to an area called Lamert Park. And everywhere other than maybe Koreatown, there's a small black enclave. But Lamert Park has historically been a black nucleus for Los Angeles and for Black culture in Los Angeles for a long time. There's a lot of historical things, just a chaos network. Shout out to the homie Verbs who did the underground show called Bananas there every month, every Tuesday. There's that Sunday marketplace where all of these like micro businesses, small vendors would come set up shop.
I
And
love that, like a swap meet style.
literally swap meet, but it'd be like food, and there's a lot of vegan options and stuff like that. We talk about the black neighborhoods being food deserts, but then you have places like Lamert Park where the kind of, I don't want to call it Rasta, but like the holistic back to Africa semi-hotep energy is very rampant. So like you get at least, a variety of food choices, not all like, soul food or something like that. And then almost pretty much every single business in the village is a black owned business. So there's a certain level of comfortability that the people have engaging with the stakeholders. Like you don't feel like you're loitering or soliciting or whatever by just being outside. And there's
There's not going to be a Starbucks incident. You remember that?
not going to be a Starbucks incident. No one's getting the police called on them. You know what I'm saying? There's elders, like shout out to Core and Baba E. Core is the Congress of Racial, the Congress of Racial Equality. They they did a lot in the civil rights movement time, especially as it relates to things happening in LA. And they have their office in Lamert Park. There's just Lamert Park has a lot of history, and there's all types of people from all walks of life, from people who are addicted to substances, who are unhoused, all the way to people who are critically acclaimed artists and streetwear people, and like the cool kids of the LA scene or whatever you want to call them. Everybody's in Lamert, and that's another thing I like about it, is that it's just black. And I oftentimes feel like a little guilty when I bring white people to Lamar. I don't do it often, but like it's just because it feels like such a sacred space. You know what I mean? For this free black feeling, and you encounter so many different types of people. Nobody really wants to be the one to like disrupt it with anything, really. So that's
It's interesting. So you've talked a lot about how mad earlier in Ethiopia, you said you felt mad American. And now I hear you describing the music of New Africa, and then you're talking about Lamert. One of the things I haven't heard you say, which is interesting, is the Ethiopian music. And I know it was more rare. And you talked about how it was housed in an Ethiopian restaurant, like the side bar area of an Ethiopian restaurant. And yet you didn't mention that. What was the relationship of that in China, towards your own lane, but then occasionally given the shout out to the Ethiopian music too?
So funny enough is like, I think there was that clash originally also because, I had never thrown a party like that before when I first got there. And I was, my work style is, like I said, very American, and the venue is very used to an Ethiopian clientele and an Ethiopian way of operating, which is kind of very laid back and, whatever. And it works for them. They make their money at the end of the day. It's not about that. It's just a different culture, like in terms of work. So there was some clashing in the beginning, and I think that there was this assumption that our crowd was the non-Ethiopian, they like, for lack of better words, not fob, or whatever. So I think that there was some kind of like feelings of like maybe exclusion in that way, where the regulars felt like Friday was no longer a time where they could be there. Well, some stayed, some came regardless. It didn't really matter. But I feel like there was some of that, which I kind of felt in the beginning was sort of something that I might have contributed to. But as, like I said, I moved forward and I grew and understood what I was trying to do, that sentiment, I feel like, I hope, went away. But funny enough, the first DJ to ever play Ethiopian music at New Africa Party was not even Ethiopian. Shout out to, I think it was like Supernova, yeah, DJ Supernova. He played some Ethiopian music, and I congratulated him so much. I'm like, wow, so many people have come through this place playing Afro beats or African music, and no one has ever played music from East Africa. Forget Ethiopia, but just East Africa in general. And that's actually a conversation that I have often with other Ethiopian and Eritrean creatives, is that why is it that our sound is so severely underrepresented in the conversation about Afro beats or modern African music? And whenever our people are in the mainstream, like Kalela, The Weeknd, Amine, whatever, they're not. It's not that they're like perpetuating a specific sound, because I mean they're American people or Canadian, whatever. Too, they're
The weekend saying what dishallo.
maybe, at the best, maybe there's like some, and then I think Amine called himself Baba in one of his songs.
Yeah, he said you can call me Papa.
Right, and there's alluding to it, but it's the sound that's so absent. And you see a lot of Ethiopian people and Eritrean people in behind the scenes in like the business side of things. But again, production wise, and it doesn't make any sense to me, because we have such a rich, again, history of music, like whether it's I mean, the mulatto Asake gets sampled like crazy, right? Like the Ethio jazz part, but that's horns. That's those are instruments that are not even really native to the area. It's again, for that time, a new Black sound. You know what I'm saying? When it was created, but we have, like the kura, the masinko, the flutes, the drums. You know what I'm saying? And even like, in church, those drum patterns are really hard to catch. You know what I'm saying? If you're not very aware of them. And I think that alternative sort of like off step, not necessarily off beat, because there is a beat. It's very unique. You know what I'm saying? And I think that there could very well, and there is now actually a more succinct, like thriving electronic Ethiopian sound coming out of Ethiopia. And I don't know about Eritrea, but potentially Eritrea as well as like some trap and other sounds. But I don't know. I just don't think that we get enough credit in the music scene, especially as much as we have to offer musically.
Yeah, you and I don't have any issues with this and these labels. And you said your dad didn't raise you that way either. Neither did my parents. But it's fascinating because there's a cultural level, there's a continent level, there's so many levels of analysis. And, genetics is a touchy subject. When people bring up genetics, the main groups of Ethiopia are Semitic, Cushitic, and Nilotic. And for the most part, that usually just refers to languages, but there's some genetic material. Most of the Semitic and the Cushitic have intermixed, whereas a lot of the Nilotic have not. Spiced, shout out to you for the $2 on the super chat. I don't see a question. Is there a question? No? Okay, well, just thank you. So a lot of people point to, the Semitic folk allegedly left Africa for 15,000 years ago, or maybe longer ago, but they came back 15,000 years ago. And these dates were so deep into prehistory, a lot of the science still needs to be worked out. The Cushitic people allegedly left sometime and came back 55,000, 60 years ago. This is a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Nilotic people, who are maybe closer related to a lot of the other Bantu people that are, you're talking about the Afro beats of the other countries in more West Africa, are people who allegedly have never left Africa. Now, what does it mean to have been in Africa for 60,000 years or 15,000 years when that's prehistory? What does it mean when you see the Ethiopian civilization and, the identity for a long time from the 300s to 1974 is of a Christian kingdom. Before the 300s, it was actually a pagan kingdom, but it was known. Even when it was pagan kingdom, it was a known kingdom. It used to have gold and silver. You talked about silver earlier. It used to have Greek on the writing. A lot of things known about Ethiopia. You talked about it being so unique. And, again, you and I don't have issues with that. But I know that because of that uniqueness, it leads some Ethiopians to not identify as Black. It leads some people who would be referred to as Ethiopians to not identify as Ethiopian. and I know we've been having a lot of these conversations about the past and trying to imagine the future. Do you have any helpful advice in terms of navigation, or just want to talk about how you've navigated, if you've ever came across that? I imagine you must have come across something of that effect. I could just say briefly, growing up, I had white Americans telling me that I was not black, that I was African and not African American, even though I was born here. And some of them were Jewish. It was funny. One was a rapper, actually. I had Black American friends who would sometimes say a similar thing. I had Ethiopian American friends who told me I was too fob. And then I had my parents. They could call me all types of names, but the word that stung the most was faranj. My parents would call me foreigner, which is hilarious because they're in America, a country they're not from, calling me a foreigner. But like the worst insult, you know what I'm saying? Like you could say Sid Balege, Chamlak, whatever, but faranj, that jump stung. And so it was like, where am I at? And you're one of the people I think closest to me. I have a few close friends who are able to kind of navigate both worlds, if not a citizen of the world, at least a citizen of these two nation states. So if you could talk about any of those experiences that you've had, and if you have any advice for navigation of that, because I think that's part of what you're talking about. And I think earlier you were saying, it's not like explicit things that were being said, but maybe undertones that they were trying to sense, like, oh, this environment has changed. It's no longer Ethiopian. Now it's Pan-African. Like,
yeah, exactly. So I also have been in those scenarios, and I dance the line a lot. I like as soon as I walk into my house, the way I talk becomes slightly accented to an Ethiopian accent or whatever, Amharic accent. And then when I'm with my friends, like without any like cognition about it, like the words that I choose, I, for lack of a better word, my black scent starts to kind of like stick out more. And that's code switching, right? And we are experts in code switching and being able to sort of assimilate. And this idea of blackness and identity is something that I've been actually thinking and talking about with my friends for the past few weeks, because I recently, like relatively recently, learned about ADOS. Are you familiar with ADOS?
Yep. My friend is a big proponent. I have one friend who's a big proponent of it, and he's a Black American with roots in Louisiana and Indiana. I have another Black friend who has some deeper roots in Haiti, but more Black American roots here in LA. And the one from Indiana and New Orleans loves that. That's African descendants of slaves. The one from LA, he doesn't like it. He says foundational Black American. Or foundational American. Like,
to be honest, that one is more makes more sense, because African descendant of slaves could definitely includes the Caribbean and South America as well. So like I know ADOS,
but they try not to. So like one of the critiques they're saying is, even if Kamala, like let's say God forbid Joe goes and Kamala becomes president, they say neither Kamala nor Obama. And I thought about this when you were saying this earlier about the Guyanese, but some of the people who are talking about her say her mom's the type of person of the class of Indians in the Caribbean who would look down on her, Black Jamaican father, and maybe Kamala represents some of that as the top cop when she was in San Francisco, and Barack Obama, raised by his white mother in like Hawaii with his Kenyan father.
Yeah.
Exactly. So there's never been an ADOS president still.
Right. And to that point, I can agree with them. Right. And they have a lot of conversations around reparations and who deserves reparations. And I totally agree. Not all Black people in this country deserve reparations. Granted, yeah, you know what I'm saying? And I'd be totally fine if the homies had reparations and I didn't, or whatever the case may be, as long as Black people are receiving it and there was an understanding, a Pan-African understanding of Blackness and what it means in this country today. But I think so anyway, the reason why I brought that up is this idea of Blackness and identity, right? And I think not the only, but one of the main reasons why we identify as Black or are asserting ourselves as Black is a reaction to whiteness. You know what I'm saying? Like if whiteness wasn't a factor, then Blackness wouldn't be as much of a conversation, or if at all. You know,
Like
and
you didn't think about it when you were living in Ethiopia. You didn't think about it. You're not waking up, oh yeah, I'm Black.
right, and it is a social construct, and that's the reason, and I believe that from the little that I know now about ADOS, like, you know, ideas, is that not everybody not everybody they believe that not everybody should be called Black for this reason. But my thing is though, despite the identity somehow still being centered around whiteness, Blackness, it's very relevant. You know what I'm saying? So anywhere that you go in this world now, as a person of like this skin tone, you're Black, and the only reason why you're Black is because of white. You know what I'm saying? So as long as there's white, you're going to be Black. So this idea that we should separate and, you know, kind of create more divisions inside of us and say, okay, well, you can't be Black and I am this, and this is my history, and even just the idea of starting your history and who you are from when you got to somewhere as a slave. It's important for the reparations component, but from an ancestral, true historical component, I personally feel like it's irrelevant. That's just me, and that could be because I'm not ADOS, or what do you call it, foundation.
Foundational, but yeah, I have to get it. There was an argument on Facebook recently. There was like a third dude, another one, and I think he was mixed white and Black, and he was trying to see which one was better between ADOS and foundational Black American. And so, like, I was telling them, like, I'm not a participant in that debate. You know, I could help you bounce back ideas, but, you know, I'm none of those things. You know what I'm saying? The Rastafarians, who often convert to the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, are very interesting. They have this thing. There's even a song that I'm forgetting it now, but they have many songs related to Ethiopia, you know, the church as Zion and all that. But one of the songs they have is I am an Ethiopian. And, you know, the word Ethiopian itself, I've talked about it in other videos with people. It was a very generic term, sometimes used by the ancient Greeks, historians like Herodotus, right? One of the first historians, if not the first. And sometimes you see these old maps where all of Africa is called Abyssinia or Ethiopia. And it's really funny. Abyssinia actually comes from the word Habasha, which was on the monuments in Ethiopia, right? And in Eritrea. But Ethiopia is really a Greek term that, because it was in the Bible, we liked it and we adopted it. And so you can determine how loosely or strictly you want to use that term. And so the Rastafarians, because they want to identify with the king who came to visit them and ended the drought, in their point of view, when the rain started raining in Jamaica, they say, I am an Ethiopian. And if you go back to Lucy or Dinkanesh, right, Australopithecus, which we have in the museum at the same time, a lot of people don't believe in evolution, one of those funny tensions in our society. But they say that she's found in the Afar region of Ethiopia. So their claim is just like, everybody's an Ethiopian. It's just a matter of, you know, how recently you've left. And I've heard a Jewish biologist say the same thing, a European Jewish one. He was on a panel with like 7 or 8 ADOS people. Actually, one of them was a Jamaican who didn't identify as Black, but the rest, you know, are ADOS, like straight from United States. And he said, I'm just less recently African than you are. And, you know, so it goes to the point, which is funny, where trans has become very accepted in regards to biology and sex, but there's a visceral reaction when it comes to race. For example, the Rachel Dolezal, she married a Black dude, she had Black children, and she wanted to put on blackface and, you know, create this Black identity. She was, I forget what she was, but she was some leadership position in the NAACP. Like, she really committed to that idea, and
Yeah.
I've never heard a good argument against it, other than like it viscerally, it doesn't feel good.
I mean, I feel like the argument against it, because this is actually the conversation we're having about identity the other day too, but is that you could take it off, right? Is that you at any moment can drop the black scent, take out the micro braids, whatever, you know what I'm saying, and then just fall back into whatever you are. And that's kind of the conversation that we have around cultural appropriation, what they call blackfishing on Instagram and stuff. And have you heard of blackfishing?
I have. That's hilarious. It's
Oh,
like catfishing, but blackfishing.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I've heard of people making money like that on
Oh
Twitter.
yeah, a lot of influencers, white girls who get like lip injections and stuff, just like assume a darker skinned personality online, and get opportunities that of people of color, to diversify brands and whatever. Just some
Shout out to my old full-blooded Italian roommate Joe Restuccia. If he's watching this, he used to say to me, because we used to be super into powerlifting when we were in college together.
Yeah.
He would say people who are darker looked more jacked. So he's like, you look more jacked, and he would always try to get a tan and stuff. And he wasn't trying to look black, but he was trying to look darker.
Yeah. They do that in bodybuilding competitions. They get like super duper tan, so you can see all the cuts and whatever.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I think that's like the biggest argument, is that you can just dibble dabble, whereas I cannot. I am this, and also it's so complicated, right? Because even so, like, you have light-skinned Black people. Rachel Dolezal, the reason why she passed for as long as she did is because we have Black people who are her exact shade of skin. And then you have
albino Black people exist.
Not even just albino. I'm talking about just light as fuck skinned Black people. And there's that colorism. That's when, so we stop talking about race now, and then we start talking about colorism. And then you break it down, and 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 then whatever the case may be. So as far as identity goes, about Blackness, I definitely feel like the main reason why we are focused on Blackness is a reaction to whiteness, is the abuses and the violence and the oppression that we feel in the society that we live in, based on our relation to Blackness, or I guess our counter relation to whiteness. And a friend of mine the other day made a point about indigenous people. Can't remember I'm going to paraphrase to kind of get the gist of it, but what she was saying is like, why do we always think about Black people as, Africans, and then that have, for one way, shape, or form, left Africa, whether it's through the slave trade or prior to that, on like, in this explorative sense? Like, what if we just considered like indigenous native people the Black people of a different place, like Black people from the Americas, you know what I'm saying? And because Black people were the original people of the planet. So why are we even dividing it into lines and continents when we are all Black people? Everybody else just deviated from that, from the farther away they got to white, or whatever the case may be. So when she said that, I was just like, what if
that leans on, you mentioned Hotepery earlier. That's some of the Hotep arguments. Probably the biggest popularity of Hotepery I have ever seen is, the biggest podcast on earth is Joe Rogan. Allegedly, he got $200 million to go on Spotify, and he had a guy who goes by Hotep Jesus on his program. And I don't think he vetted him properly, and I don't think he's ever going to invite him back. But Joe Rogan had no idea. He's an Italian-Irish dude from Boston, and he's in his 50s. He had no idea what a Hotep was. So he didn't understand what was happening. And he proceeded to tell him that basically like the slave trade never happened, or that it was minimal. And then really Black people are the American Indians. Like, they were here already. Like, he was on that, like, that's what he was pitching to him.
I mean, I don't see that, like, because we are just force fed this idea that Africa is like, the birthplace of everything, and Black people are only relegated to Africa. And the only reason why Black people are anywhere else is majority because of slave trade. And then, there's a brief dabbling of the historical accounts of, Black explorers from Africa going to the different places and then meeting these indigenous peoples of these other places. But why is that? Why aren't like, because black is just a thing that we labeled everyone, you know what I'm saying, or that white people labeled everyone. Why wouldn't native people be black people? Like, what makes them different? And outside of
The old racialists would call them Asiatic, and especially if you see the indigenous of like Alaska,
oh,
people like to say the Inuit, but I've heard recently that they actually prefer to be called Eskimo.
oh,
I don't know the facts on that, but they're gangster. A lot of them are carnivores. They just eat fish.
oh.
But if you look at a lot of them, they look more Korean
But
than.
who are the Koreans? If you look at, I forgot what the tribe is in the South Africa, where the people who live there are very like well, they're kind of fair, like light yellow skin.
Mhm.
They have very like narrow eyes, like how what we consider the Asiatic people to have
Yeah.
those eyes. So a lot of the characteristics of the Asian people were already found in a considered black place. Did you ever watch Hidden Colors?
No, what's that about?
Hidden Colors is like this documentary series. It's like the PhD of Hotepery, if you will, like whatever.
I heard about it through Dr. Umar Johnson and
Yeah,
who's
you
the
gotta
other
watch
dude out here in LA?
I
There's a dude
feel
in LA who beefed with him.
Oh, yeah, I feel like you would enjoy it, especially somebody who appreciates history.
Yeah,
And there
I've heard
are a
of it.
lot of black archaeologists and people who are contributing to this information, like Ivan von Sertima, I think was a big one. He's black, I believe he's from Guyana, I think. But because we don't hear about our history from the mouths of black people. We always hear about our history as far as like science goes through the Western narrative. So and we see somehow, I don't know why we tend to discredit black historians and black archaeologists, sociologists, and whatever when when they make these claims that are counter to the popular understanding of things. But anyway, Hidden Colors, they talk about, there's this one part of it, I think there's three videos, it's a series or whatever. And there's one part where they talk about how Africans are the ones who took the people from the mainland of China to Japan. And that's why if you go to, what's that area? Not Hiroshima, but Okinawa, something like. Anyway, you see the people have broad noses and sometimes higher cheekbones, and they have certain features, African features, that you wouldn't necessarily put on somebody who who's Asian in one way, shape, or form. So I mean, I don't know. I have no real basis outside of Hidden Colors to support that. I didn't look too far into it.
I would watch it. I would definitely watch it.
You should get
I'm
into
usually
it.
interested in at least the critique that Hotepery offers. A lot of times I'm not there for what they're trying to replace it with, but it's an interesting part of the collab. In the show Dear White People, I watched the movie and the show. In the show Dear White People, they did a really good job, and it made me like reminiscent of my college days of showing like all the different facets, like
Yeah.
jock black people,
Yeah.
nerd black people, you know what I mean? LGBTQ black people, hotep black people, woke black people. And it was interesting seeing them all interact. The light-skinned complex, how usually the lightest skinned feels like they have to prove their blackness because everybody's doubting their blackness. Like that's in there.
Yeah.
The darker skinned one who's actually from the hood but wants to put away the shackles of that and wants to hang out and become with the richer white folks. Like it had a lot of those dynamics.
Yeah, and I think that brings you back to the point of like trans identity. One of these guys I was talking to the other day, he just says he's a free thinker and this and that and whatever, and I think he's some type of medical student, like a psychiatry or something like that. Anyway, was saying that he comes into spaces sometimes not wanting to be of the identity that everyone is, I guess, pushing on him to be the dominant part of his identity. So sometimes he walks into a room or a situation and he doesn't want to be the man. Not to say that he in that moment is a girl, but he
Yeah, I
doesn't
understand.
want to be the man, or he doesn't want to be the black person, or he doesn't want to be the call it whatever you want, that specific group of people is asserting that he is in that day. So there is a level of fluidity that he wants to experience as it relates to his identity outside of his sexuality. I think, like you said earlier, gender and sexuality is probably the place where fluidity is the most accepted, even though it's still very much like an uphill battle with that. But regardless, it's like at least has a place in the narrative.
In cosmopolitan cities in the United States. That's what I meant. Yeah. Obviously not in Ethiopia and not in a lot of rural areas in the United States.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And yeah, and exactly. So, but I think, and it's funny, Patrice O'Neill has this stand-up.
One of my favorites.
Yeah, elephant in the room, and he has this joke where he talks about Obama, and he's like, if you white people would just shut up about it for just a little bit, maybe we would be on your side more. You know what I'm saying? We want to not like him too, but y'all do all these rallies and this and that and whatever, so we can't outwardly say that. You know what I'm saying? And I think that has a lot in a way to do with identity. If it wasn't so rigid, and if it wasn't so rooted in this dark, oppressive, violent, systematic, bullshit, then maybe we would be more fluid. Maybe, there wouldn't be such a boundary and a constraint to what Blackness means. And we would be able to kind of accept that we all were once Black people. Some of us still are. Some of us are very much far from that. But I don't think it matters because we're not there. So it's irrelevant almost. It's just interesting to think about.
It's also interesting. Earlier, you talking about the exclusivity and almost the potential guilt you are feeling in regards to maybe bringing a white liberal to Lamart Park. And what's funny to me about that is Malcolm X had some not so kind words to say about white liberals. I saw a debate on Twitter recently that cracked me up between a kind of, people kind of call this conglomerate sometimes the conscious community. That's a different way than saying Rastafarian. Other people refer to it as various Black nationalist movements. Actually, Hotep Jesus identifies as a Black nationalist, but people are saying, what are you? Some type of Hotep Jesus? And he just ran with the name when people labeled him. So what's interesting is the debate between the Black nationalist and the white liberal was trying to tell the white liberal that they didn't kind of want their aid, they didn't want their help. And they said, like, forget you. And they quote tweeted it. And they said, white liberals don't realize that Get Out was about them. And they had this scene when you're talking about Obama and Patrice O'Neill, who's one of the, RIP, one of the comedy goats. And the line from the Get Out movie is between a Black person and a white person at a dinner party. And the white liberal figure, for people who didn't understand it, said, I would have voted for Obama a third time. Like, that's boom. You do that and that's it. We straight, we goody.
Yeah, it's like peace offering almost, like, hey, I'm with the shits kind of thing, like, which that's its own, like, and that's the thing, being Black and having that label, whether you accept it or not, is a tiring everyday struggle. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's situations where you have to argue with other Black people about this and that and the way and how to move and what the right thing is for the people and this and that. And then you have to then go out into the world and deal with white people and all of their ignorance and all of their desire to be educated by you in that moment, in 5 minutes or less, on the way to the lunch break or whatever, you know what I'm saying, that it is. And then you have situations like the other day, what happened in was it the insurrection at the Capitol, where white supremacy pretty much took a dump on its own front porch. You know what I mean? And I thought it was very interesting to watch.
Some of them have been found out to be police, which is hilarious.
Yeah, they were saying like how long it took for like the riot team to get there, and they're like, yeah, they had to go home and change and then come back in their clothes. That's why it took as long as it did. And it's true. Like there was lawmakers, police, teachers, and I think it's I'm enjoying all of the videos about getting kicked off planes, the no-fly list. I think it's funny, but I definitely think it was a wake-up call for white people only. For us, it's kind of been like, Yeah, we know that they are so bold to think that they can just take our lives without any recourse. Why wouldn't this be on their list of things that they could do? There's nothing that these people feel like they're above. You know what I'm saying? The law, the police are their personal security unit that they can just use as a flashcard. I'll call the police on you. That they know what that means when they're saying it to certain people. So anyway, I'm saying that to say that for a white liberal, when they it's like that embarrassing cousin or that embarrassing uncle, at the cookout who's drunk, or whatever the case may be, and you have to sort of like deal with the fact that that's your family member. And I think that that moment in history really showed white liberals that instead of trying to talk to us about voting for Obama a third time, they need to be talking to their cousin Larry. You know what I'm saying? And figuring out with and fighting and whatever. And I've seen a lot of that. Gen Z is really good at calling out their racist parents and things like that. I think I saw something where some girl changed her status to conservative on Tinder or something, and yeah, and she was like matching with all these MAGA dudes, and they were like bragging about being at the insurrection and stuff like that, and she was reporting them to the FBI. I don't know if that's real,
Dang.
but that was her, effort, I guess, in the whole thing. But I don't know.
I was like, that kind of goes against the ethos of stop snitching.
Right. And that's another thing that's been a really interesting conversation about defunding the police versus abolitionists and people who have been saying that they're abolitionists but are calling for the imprisonment of the people who are at the Capitol. It's like, so your ideas only work when they are affirming you, but not when they're, you know what I'm saying? Like, so
One of my favorite terms, it was used in a piece at Reason magazine about Kamala Harris, is what they call the carceral feminist.
what's that?
Pro-prison, but they say they're feminist.
Right. So, we're kind of grappling and we're forced to be confronted with our ideologies as an entire nation, but even individually inside of our races, having to see things, for what they are. Like, what do you really believe? Do you want to create a new world, or do you want just a better life in this world? Integration versus the separatist thing that we're talking about, but on another scale and in a different way. Do you want it all to come down, or do you want to be the governor of wherever you're at? You know what I'm saying? Like,
There was another one that was going around today that I shared as well. And someone was like, oh, how old is the United States? And it's like about 245 years and above. For some reason in the Google search, it had some quote from, I think, some British historian or another. And it said that most empires fail around 250 years. And they were like, oh, sounds about right. It's about that time.
It's only 250 years old, though. Like, I thought slavery was like 400 years.
Yeah, so talking about the formation of the United States as a nation state, which happens around a little bit before 1800. I'm getting the dates might be off. It's like 1789 or something till the present day. But yeah, I mean, people have been in the United States since the 1600s. I want to say
colony or whatever back then, I guess.
Yeah, 13 colonies, and that's ever shifting. Yeah, so people. What was the name? There's the date given by the people at the New York Times, the project, I think it's 1619 project, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea behind that, and it's gotten many critics, both from the center left and from the right. And they to the credit of the New York Times, they've published some of the critics, even within the New York Times, about what is it that we're talking about. And so they wanted to center the idea of slavery, like you just mentioned. And, obviously some of the critics talk about how it's a worldwide institution, and yet somehow it still had a unique aspect in the United States. But 1619 as a date of founding refers to that. I think it's whenever the first slaves came, versus, the Declaration is in 1776, the end of the war is the end of the 1780s. I think Thomas Jefferson is president around 1803 or something. So, yeah, I mean, people have different different ways of counting it. Any way you cut it, the big picture idea is every empire that has ever existed failed. Fukuyama in the 90s thought that whatever it is we have, the liberal world order, is some sort of perfection, that, you know, we are different than everyone else in history. History's over, and this is going to be forever. The church normally has the response that the only kingdom that's forever is the one above. Everything here is temporary. And we're so biased and into, you know, sold into the foreverness of ourselves that we don't see the signs around us of, like you said, things falling apart that would facilitate something new coming. But some of us do see some signs on the wall.
I mean, I think it's like like you said, every empire has that same thing. Even if you look at like Haile Selassie or whatever, where it was too old school for the today. And I think the rules and the whatever the systems of America don't match the now. The black people were never counted as people. You know what I'm saying? And they are very
Three-fifths.
okay, yeah, but in the sense of like in the making of the laws and the rules and the whatever, they weren't being considered as a part of this estimation. So now that you have this institution or these institutions that were created to only service X amount of people, but then other people still live and you have to service them inside these institutions as well. They're by nature or by proxy or whatever are naturally going to be marginalized by these institutions. So you can only marginalize a people for but so long. You know what I'm saying? Until even the people who are benefiting from the system are going to realize it. Everyone's going to realize it's not unless unless the system itself does a complete remodernization, 360, whatever you want to call it, or 180, then it's going to come down. And I guess the modernization of it would be it's coming down. And I'm excited for the future. I think that this insurgence, or what do you call it, insurrection, was just like Moses opening up the Red Sea for Black, Indigenous people of color, specifically Black and Indigenous people, to be able to walk into our futures and experience this new age. Were you hip to the whole December 21st superpowers?
Yeah, and I was surprised by how many of my friends didn't understand that that comes from the astrology movement. And maybe it's because I've got the religious background that I recognize things like that. People thought it was just like it's a Black thing. It's like, no, it's like a Black people on Twitter who are interested in astrology and popularized it thing.
And well, the one of the things that we're moving into a new age. I believe it's the age of Aquarius or out of the age of Aquarius, one of those two. We're moving into a new age, and there's a lot of new. And in order for there to be new, a lot of times there has to be destruction, right? There's the way of the world. And I really hope that we can come out of it still ourselves. Like the destruction doesn't necessarily mean that we have to turn into something that we're not, or like people as a whole, have to like, just go all Walking Dead on each other. But I don't know.
It's funny that you say that, because a lot of the people that are interested in not necessarily just Afrofuturism, but futurism in general, there's a category of those people who are transhumanists, right? That's another usage of the word trans, right? So those are the people, some of those people are animal rights activists and want to envision worlds in which, animals get some sort of rights that are enshrined somehow more so than they do today. Another group of those people are those like interested in the AI, artificial intelligence, the singularity, and people like Elon Musk. He's got one of his many companies is trying to put literal chip in your brain to make you have access to the internet through your thoughts. And people ask this question: at what point are you no longer human? As on the other side, in Japan and other places, they're building like the robots. They got, people got sex dolls and other things. I think they had that in Texas as well. So there's a question about do animals, robots, do whatever something is beyond human, do those have rights too? What the hell does race mean to a robot or to someone who's got a chip in their brain?
Well, I mean, I think there was, I don't know if it was Facebook or Microsoft that ran this like experiment where they like tried to use this bot to like scour the internet and based on like the habits of people, like create a personality for itself. And the bot was like super racist. And it's because people online are like trolling and what, I don't know, maybe there's like a I don't know, like calculation of what people really feel versus what it actually is online, or I'm not sure. But yeah, the bot was super racist. And then also algorithms and things like that are built by people. So there's bias. And so naturally there's going to be that. So in regards to what does race mean to a robot, nothing really other than what it's been programmed to think. You know what I'm saying? And
Yeah,
then,
Timnit Gabru recently parted ways, as neutrally as I could say it, with Google, and at least one other person, I think Ababao, she's in the UK. There are a couple of Ethiopians. Timnit is actually Amiche, so an Eritrean who grew up in Addis Ababa, who are working in that space of what they call ethical AI, right? The idea that you could take some precautions to try to take away those biases on the front end so that they don't show up in those bots. So you have racist bots. That's hilarious.
yeah, imagine. As far as what makes us human and our souls and things, you know, some people argue that we're in a simulation right now. You know what I'm saying? Like as soon as we die, we're gonna wake up in like I don't know, maybe like a chamber or something. Who knows? I don't know. But
That's the
but
Matrix.
yeah, like the Matrix. I think so. The Baha'i faith has an interesting way of, you know, um, talking about purpose in this life. And they say that similar to you in the womb as like a fetus, you are inside of that reality or that environment or that world, growing the things that are required of you to survive in the next life, in the next stage of life. Arms, heart, lungs, all that stuff you're going to need when you're out of the womb. You know what I'm saying? That's what you're growing while you're in there. And what they say is that while you're living this life, this part of your life, that you're essentially developing your soul, so that your soul or the thing that makes you human or whatever you want to call it, or being alive, um, is getting chiseled and developed because it's in a way that is going to pretty much sink or swim it in the next phase of life. And they talk about proximity to God, or what we believe is God, which I guess we could equal to love, you know, those sorts of feelings, being what heaven and hell is in terms of the proximity that your soul exists to this God thing or whatever. I don't know. So I guess what I'm saying is that I think what is human and what is humanity is something that can be chiseled and affected by the life and the living that you do. Just regurgitating the motions of life doesn't actually make it life. So like if I were to study my patterns and know that every night I tend to go for like a midnight snack and my fake Adees bot, you know, stomach grumbles around this time, you know, or grumbles, it's just imitating life at the end of the day. Is a very, 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 very good imitation of life, but it's not actually life because it can't continue on outside of this realm.
It's interesting, a lot of these ideas, and it's so fascinating how they all connect together. My my biblical Hebrew teacher is a savage. He's in the Eastern Orthodox Church. Someone was just asking about the similarities between the Eastern Orthodoxy and Ethiopian Church. We're in the Afro-Asiatic Church, sometimes called the Oriental Orthodox Church, which is different than the Eastern Orthodox. Both of those churches have long traditions in Greek. And one of the things that the early Greek fathers did is that they tried to mix the current, at the time, intellectual work, which was the Greek philosophy, which was inherently related to the Greek gods and the Greek pantheon. And my biblical Hebrew teacher, he hates this because the whole point of when they translated the Hebrew Bible into Greek was so that people could get the worldview of the Hebrew Bible, not to incorporate that. But a lot of those early people Some of them knowingly, some of them unknowingly did that. And so the idea I think that you express comes from the Baha'i faith. A lot of that comes from Platonism. And you'll see that Platonism and Neoplatonism sometimes in some of the Christian writings. You see it in some Islamic writings because they picked it up too. The recent movie that came out about Black Americans called Soul. I haven't watched it yet, but I've heard a lot of people talk about the analysis, and already I could hear it sound similar. And a lot of these ideas tie back to Plato, which is one of the classics of the Western tradition. So it's very fascinating to hear you say that, because that was one of the many subjects that I picked up in philosophy back in the days as an undergraduate. But yeah, the Semitic mindset is very different. So in Hebrew, the word is nefesh, and of course in Amharic it's nefs, and nefesh and nefs, they sound alike. It's just you turn the S into a SH. And that idea, they define it differently. They define it like a breath of life. And so they think about it as if God, through his nostrils, breathes life into you to animate you. And so, in Ethiopia, they'll say, oh, nafsu wata, sometimes to say that something died. It's like his soul went out of him. It's like whatever was animating him stopped animating him. And it's kind of more just talking about what people are doing here. But as far as like building in other planes, it's so fascinating how nothing is new under the sun. Like there's so many different traditions that have come up with something very, very similar to that. But yeah, it's good to think about and reflect on.
Say that there are universal truths that one could essentially download, like independent of knowing or learning about any religion?
Yes, for sure.
So, I mean, I feel like that's kind of what it is, though, right? It's like we're sort of, like you said, there's nothing new under the sun. We're just sort of like, so I had this phase where, because I grew up Orthodox Christian, and I was, I guess, I moved myself from the faith, or I let go. However, I don't know how you say that, but
self-excommunication.
Yeah, in college, through a variety of reasons, but and through that there was like this very big black hole, because I think up until then I had just been Christian because that's what I was told and what I knew about life, and I knew God was real still in that time of not being a Christian because of my experience. I had physical, experiences where I felt that God was very real in my life, and I couldn't deny it for that reason. But the story of Christianity was just kind of like question mark to me. I wasn't all the way with it anymore. But so because of that, in Christianity, I felt as though there's a lot of things that are told to you as facts. This is the case. Jesus is God's son. If you do not believe this, then you go to hell, or whatever the case may be. There's these like kind of like constants that happen. So you have
dogma in the church. Yeah, they call it dogma, and it's why dogma has a bad name in the West nowadays.
Okay, so dogma, and so without those things, it was a very big black hole. I did not know what was real and what wasn't real. Like I knew God was real, but that's it. I didn't understand anything outside of that. And the way that I came back to myself spiritually is through, for lack of a better term, these downloads that I would receive, or like certain how do I say, realizations, or like things that I would notice and hear and think about, that would literally bring tears to my eyes, like when I would realize them, or when I would download them. Not like a boohoo kind of crying, but like a feeling of like, oh, that's true. You know what I'm saying? And I didn't have any book or priest or anybody to tell me if in fact that belonged to any
tradition.
Yeah. And then it's not until later on that, as I grew and learned about more things, that, like you said, I found out that there are many different people who have explored this specific concept in their own way. And I don't believe that I'm a prophet or anything of that nature. I just think that there's something that we all are tapping into and knowing that is true. The originators of all of these religions are tapping into the same sort of thing, but producing it and relaying it in a way that is very specific to the individuals that they're talking to in that moment. And those religions are just happen to live on past that moment, past that geographical location, for a variety of reasons, whether it's the violent conquest of places and resources, or whether it's just a part of the tradition of that religion is to spread it for whatever reason. I don't know. But I find that to be interesting. And I find that we are all more similar than different in that way. Um, Religious and non-religious people who believe in God.
Yeah, that's beautiful, and thank you for being so frank about it. It's like a lot of people don't even want to touch the subject. Sometimes I bring things up, but sometimes just like people see my internet personality, and so they just like think about it around them. I remember a homie one time we were out somewhere, and I think they had a sip or two, and they came up to me and they were saying, "You probably think I'm going to hell, huh?" And I was like, "Have you ever heard me say that anywhere?" Like,
Yeah.
people don't hear me say that, but like there's different assumptions, I think, about Christianity in the West if they haven't encountered it, as it's expressed in Ethiopia, as it's expressed in Syria, Armenia, Egypt, and Kerala, India, which is our communion, for the person who asked about the difference between the Greeks and us, Afro-Asiatics. But it's very personal for us as individuals, going back to the idea of individuals versus the collective in America, because we have so many options, and because we are between these kind of worlds. Today, people celebrating the 202nd birthday of Emperor Theodros, or Emperor Theodore. He was the person who, in large part, you can attribute the founding of the modern Ethiopian nation state. We had a loose confederacy of kingdoms that we refer to as Ethiopia for a long time. We can say for 2 millennia, and we could say that confidently. But as we know it today, really, it's him. And if you ask me, when I study the history, I truly believe he was an atheist. But he didn't have that language. You know what I'm saying? In Ethiopia, they don't care what your individual perspective of metaphysics is. It's like, where does your grandma stay? That's what Kendrick said, right? Where your grandma at? Like, what does your grandma believe? And that's pretty much what you are.
Yeah.
Everyone identifies him as an Orthodox Christian because that's the cultural context. Nobody calls him a Muslim because he wasn't that. Did he live a life according to the principles of Orthodox Christianity? Not really. He was a brutal dude. He
Yeah.
united everybody, but he was a brutal dude. He made unity through brutality, through force and show of force. So it's interesting to hear you talk about that individualized journey, because that's something a lot of our ancestors would not have had access to, because they don't even have that language.
Right. Exactly. That's very true. Yeah. Earlier you were talking about off this recording, we were talking about a benevolent dictatorship or whatever. And I think and this is a very unpopular idea, even to my own self, when I say it out loud, because it's like it sounds so bad. But I think for any ginormous shift or change in a way of being, or whatever the case may be, there has to be some sort of like, not has to be, but historically there has always been some kind of forceful push into a very specific direction. So whether it's colonizing an area and then nationalizing it and forcing everybody to speak one language and forcing everybody into one religion and forcing everybody into whatever the case may be, because there's this like agenda, there's this like big picture idea that requires everybody to be on board for it. And I think that's why all of these, liberation movements and leaders of liberation movements, when they finally reach their independence, almost always end up being dictators. Like, I can't think of one really where that didn't happen. And if anything, they were like taken out before they got a chance to get on their full dictator on. But it's like they're on the way there. And I think it's because they are so just believe in their idea of, okay, this is what it's going to take to move us out of something that was into something that is new. And every single person has to be on board. And that is the intriguing part about religious involvement in these movements, because the everybody being on board is the belief in like a like esoteric belief in it, in a way that exceeds your life here right now. So it's like, if you believe in this God who is like, you know, the pundits for this God are the one telling you what to do and not do, then the likelihood that you're going to fall in line with the agenda is way more. It's ingrained in you from in a like a spiritual way. So I'm surprised there are not more religious dictators, to be honest.
It, yeah, there's a proponent of that,
Yeah.
right? And I had him on my show. Again, it was the most popular video on my channel. And I asked him at one point what his metaphysics was. And he said basically he's of mixed kind of ancestry, and part of it is Jewish, but you know, all the Jews were communist in his family. And so they tossed kind of their Judaism. And
Mhm.
then I think, I don't know if he was, you know, part Catholic or part Protestant. He didn't talk about the other side, but he was like, you know, we just need a state religion, a confessional state. And it was funny because you don't hear a lot of people talking about it openly like that. But it
Mhm.
was interesting that he said that. And going back to Emperor Teddy, let me give him a shout out. Emperor Theodros, there was something I read about him today because a lot of people were posting about his 202nd birthday. And one of the things is he had some foreigners, some Europeans who were in the country, and he took care of them. You know, hospitality. If there's one thing all Ethiopians agree on, which is very few things nowadays, it's hospitality towards the stranger. And so he was showing a lot of hospitality to them, but he
And
said before they get on their ship back,
mhm,
make sure that they wash their feet.
mhm,
And they came back, and the Europeans are like, "Why do you want us to wash our feet?" And he's like, "While you were here in my country, I was willing to give you all of these things. But the one thing to me that was so precious that I cannot allow you to bring back to your country is the dirt of my country." Afaru. And
mhm,
they were shook.
mhm,
And it shows you that, like what you were saying, Emperor Theodros, who's the founder of the modern Ethiopian nation state, was this dictator. At the same time, he was this great uniter. And his big idea that, you know, he eventually died for was this idea of a unified Ethiopia. You know, for better or for worse, you leave that to people. But I'll throw down theories of history and see what you think about it.
mhm,
There are probably more, but these are the ones I think of. Thomas Carlyle is a historian who popularized the idea. It's called the great man theory, that
mhm,
there are always these certain individuals who arise in history, who are the movers and shakers that cause things to happen. The other people are typically people who believe in systems. And normally, people who are generally considered left wing are people who are systems thinkers, and people who are considered right wing are typically individualists, where the stereotype of the pull yourself up by your own bootstraps comes from, right? So, very loosely speaking, that's kind of left wing or right wing. Then there's kind of a more mixed or centrist view that, well, they're kind of these systems, but those systems always need that one kind of person to make that move. And in black movements in America, that has been the kind of critique. So the modern protesters, from BLM to what's been going on more recently, they critique what they call respectability politics, which is the older civil rights movement way. The older civil rights movement was a bunch of great men, basically. And
mhm.
in a modern one, they want it to be a little more networked and more of a system. Do you
Mhm.
have any thoughts on, like, you know, whether you personally view things in terms of like great people or systems, or some some sort of combination of the two?
Um, I think I would say it's a combination of the two that might be more reliant on a system. The way I see it, I think the only real change can happen. First of all, you know, Gil Scott Heron, the television, I mean, the revolution will not be televised, speaking to the first revolution happening in our brains and our minds. And that's what he meant by it not being televised. And I think that's the first step, right? Is to awaken the consciousness of in the individual self. And so, but outside of that, if every person was responsible for their block, literally their either their geographic location where they live, or maybe just their social network digitally or otherwise. And their block consists of a minimum of 10 people. And those 10 people on a certain level of foundations of like equality, whatever, make the list of things, were responsible for just those people, and that was it. And every single person had a group of 10. Then it would be, without trying to be, a system and a network of community, especially if we're going to say if it's geographical. And I believe you were on the call that we had with Dr. G about the
Yep.
Alpha Square, where it was a hybrid of a physical and a digital, where there was a physical space that represented certain elements of the movement. So
In Lamert, right?
well, in the South LA area. So there was like King and Crenshaw, that was considered the legacy, like stakeholder and legacy. So you had HBCUs, historically Black colleges, and I'm not sorry, colleges, but sororities and fraternities, and things that are NAACP, things that are considered legacy, was represented by that particular corner of whatever.
Sandman Goose, R.I.P., was killed on that corner. The Eritrean rapper.
Eritrean rapper, yeah. So right there. So that but digitally, that can represent itself in many different ways. So anybody who's already in the works of that I guess theme of legacy could rally around what's been done geographically in a digital space, so it can bring more people into the conversation. I'm not saying it has to be exactly like that, where this corner equals this. It would be nice to have a framework like that just preset out, so that you know where to go and where to be, and you know where the thing that you're interested in is, physically and digitally. But I really believe that their small cell organization, and then those small cells linking with one another, eventually become larger cell, or not cells, but groupings. And then those groupings, linking with one another, become, different factions. And I'm using the wrong words probably 100%, but you kind of get my drift, where there is a sort of systemic kind of function to it, but it is 100% decentralized. But in order to even begin in a grassroots level, you yourself, in the awakening of your consciousness, are the great man. And I say great for the context of your immediate circle or cell of the 10 people. Do you know what I mean? Like, you don't have to be a great man for the entire nation of America or the entire Black people. You just have to be the great man for your block. You know what I mean? So that's why I say a combination of both.
Yeah, I quoted in a book review of Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me, which was published in a peer-reviewed journal in the California caucus of the Journal of the California Caucus of University and College Ombuds. It's a mouthful, but basically conflict managers who work in universities. I quoted this line from South Park, and I was so happy that they let it in the journal, in a peer-reviewed journal, quoted it, and it said, "Jesse Jackson is not the emperor of Black people."
I bet he's not. He's really not. And Black people are not a monolith. Jesse Jackson, like you said earlier, there's so, like, in Dear White People, there's so many different types of Black people. So many, to the point where it's like, to try and explain it even to somebody else who's not Black is kind of like, I mean, I can't. Have you ever been in those circumstances or situations where you've been kind of expected to explain something from the position of a Black person, as if you could encompass the feelings of an entire race in your response?
Yeah, that was most of my high school. There was a moment in my high school where I was the only Black male. There were 10 Black people in our high school for a moment, and like 9 of them were girls, and I was the only boy. So, I've been in that situation a lot. I went blickety black, like CB4. People share the CB4 meme a lot, but I was never a hotep. But, I grew out my hair for a year and a half, no lineup, no taper, no nothing, on some Huey Newton. You know what I'm saying? On some Arbeñoch from Ethiopia, World War II against Italy stuff. The real anti-fascist, the OG, the Afro-Asiatic anti-fascist.
Being the only Black people will definitely radicalize you for sure. Either that, or it'll completely like obliterate your feelings of wanting to be Black, depending on who you are.
You either lean into it or you just totally assimilate. And I've I've had vibes of both. You know, I was a dude reading manga and watching anime too. And now that's a cool thing. Now it's like a cool category of Black people who are allowed to do that. But
Right.
not when I started in 2003.
Maybe not. It seems like they've always lived among us, but never had the room to be themselves, because the amount of Black men that I know and who are into anime and cartoons and things like that. I don't know if it's like you said, because it's an allowed or whatever, but they have a history of liking this stuff. So it's like they know about, what is it, Bleach and all those other things like from before. So it's not, you can't have this entire catalog of anime within the last like 5-6 years. Like you had to have been into this for a while. You just never told anybody.
Talked about it. Yeah. I mean, the one people could get away with is Dragon Ball Z, because it was like dubbed in English and it was on Cartoon Network and Toonami. But a lot of the other ones, like you said, Bleach, Naruto, One Piece, these things with time, Death Note. I mean, you could say the pioneers of that was the Wu-Tang Clan out of Staten Island, which they called Shaolin, and they were a huge fusion of the Asiatic and the Black. And you know, that's what Ethiopian culture is. Like we are seated in Africa, in the Horn of Africa, and nobody can deny that. And like literally Black means of African descent. At the same time, we have huge cultural ties to people in the Levant and people in Saudi Arabia and Yemen. You look at some Yemeni people and you blink a couple times because some of them look straight Ethiopian. And that's because that was a territory of Ethiopia during King Caleb, after King Gizana. So it wasn't until the Persians kicked us out of there that we hopped it back to the Horn of Africa. We got roots in West Asiatic cultures naturally in our people in terms of Ethiopia, and in Black people writ large. Wu-Tang is definitely the pioneer of that. I remember the race draft on the Chappelle show. I think they played around with some of that. I think the Asian delegation chose the entire Wu-Tang clan, and they had a hilarious speech.
Wu-Tang, yeah, that was it. I think what we chose, we gave up Tiger Woods, or we chose Tiger Woods. I can't remember.
I think we gave him up. I don't or trade for Eminem. I don't know. I have to rewatch it, but yeah, that's the comedy goat right there.
That is the comedy goat. But funny enough, I was watching season 1 before he like asked all of his fans to not watch it on Netflix, and I was thinking like, man, season 1 did not age very well. Like there were some things that did very much so, but I was like, when I'm looking back on it, I'm like, dang, like
what people forget is Clayton Bigsby was episode 1. He opened. That was the premiere episode.
And that was one of the ones that aged very well, I thought. But there were some that definitely didn't. And that speaks to that growth of like what we talk about being a role model and whatever the case may be, like the things that I would laugh at when I was young and things that I just didn't understand. And to this day, I have a very more like twisted sense of humor that I, like, and I want to keep, and I don't want to have to be so respectable to not laugh when I think it's funny, especially because it's funny.
It's funny.
It'd be funny, you know what I'm saying? But someone was asking about my white Jesus photos. I don't know. Honestly,
they called you out.
It's like
Black nationalist.
I show you the statue that my mom has had for a long time, and I think it's so questionable. And I show everybody now, but
we had this convo off camera a little bit, so I'll tell the questioner. The Ethiopian psychology doesn't feel the weight of colonization. And so there are a lot of indigenous Ethiopian icons. I'm sure we had Syrian and Egyptian icons at one point, which would be more, Mediterranean, Eastern Mediterranean looking, more olive skinned. But the kind of Roman Catholic white Jesus and white Mary, a lot of them, they're just not fazed by it because they have a certain swagger or confidence, because that white Jesus was never imposed on them. Those white Jesus are usually somebody gives it to you as a gift. And in our culture, it's very rude to deny a gift. So you would just accept the gift. You know what I'm saying? But we have our own deep tradition of iconography. I was just reading earlier this week about this Danish nun who wrote about the Amharic and Ge'ez tradition of the psalm interpretation And she used to make Ethiopian icons, even though she was Danish, So I think we just sort of accept everything as long as it's about Jesus and the Virgin Mary. But yeah, go ahead and show the statue and talk about it.
Do you see this? Okay, so this has been in my house for a very long time, since as long as I can remember. And I always thought it was odd, but I didn't really look at it till I was older. And so as you can see, this is the white Mary and baby, Jesus. And then the really interesting thing is this bottom part where it's this boat, and there's these two white men with the paddles who are obviously like, pushing the boat forwards. And then the man in the middle is a black man who does not have a paddle, who's praying upwards and looking at Mary and Jesus, almost like to save him. Like, oh shit, like I'm about to get these white people are taking me somewhere on this boat, literally. And I have no control over it, praying to this like giant Mary and Jesus that showed up in the ocean, or whatever. And even you can't really see the faces. I think maybe you can.
A little bit.
But it kind of looks like the white people are a little bewildered, like, like, you know what I'm saying? Like what?
Yeah, it's an apparition. They call them apparitions of Mary, where Mary appears at various places.
The black person looks kind of like yes, she came. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know, but it's just a very weird statue to have in my house of all places. Yes, so this is very weird. It's in my house. I cannot remove it. I'll get it.
Amada akum jirta galata waqayo. They say they're an Amharic speaker, but they're Oromo. So I threw a little Oromo in there for them.
Oh, akum. That's all I know, but like I'm trying to learn more. But yeah. So I told you what I did to my grandma the other day, right?
What?
So my grandma, she was in the hospital, and she asked me to send her a picture of Mary, Mariam. And so I looked up the blackest find, and I sent it to her just so.
Did she react?
No, I wish she would. The way that they say that, oh, Jesus, it doesn't matter what color he is, and whatever. If she reacted to Black Mary and Jesus, I would have been like, nah.
So she didn't, right? So that goes along with what I'm saying. Yeah, the psychological damage and confidence is different. They don't speak a lick of Oromo. I was gonna sing an Oromo for you. I know Oromo Mazmur. That's okay.
All I know is I can.
They speak Amarinya. That's good. Anyway, I'm glad you tested your grandma in that way, and she passed with flying colors. You got a woke grandma, so shout out to her. Any closing thoughts, parting thoughts, and final plugging? We mentioned some of your ventures earlier. You want to plug anything at the end so people could know where they could holler at it?
Yes. Okay. So please follow 1-800-Pull-Up Gang. That's spelled exactly as I said it, 1-800-Pull-Up Gang. And follow New Africa, NUAFRICA World, New Africa World on Instagram. And that's where we'll be kind of, we really transformed what we were doing in real life and are trying to create more equity online. So finding the roots and the similarities between the African people, as well as creating a brand new sound and brand new ideas for people to kind of tap into as well. And we're trying to create that community online. And hopefully after COVID really like slows down, we can really get into the IRL stuff. We have some merch for sale. I mean, I don't know if you want to buy it. It's pretty tight. Looks kind of cool. So yeah, so check us out on there. My name is Adees. You can holler at me whenever. Stay black.
That's one of my favorite things. All right,
Henok, thank you for having me.
All right, bye.